of Rewrite Reads. I'm Zara, the editor of the magazine, and we've got an exciting lineup of speakers today and tomorrow. Before we get into it, a bit about our Lit Mag and the organization Rewrite. So Rewrite Reads is a literary magazine featuring outstanding writing by Black women and women of color from across the globe. We publish short stories, poetry, photo essays, and thought-challenging pieces from established and emerging voices. We launched in November of 2019 and had to pause for most of last year due to we all know what, but now we're up and running. And here I want to give major thanks to Resourcing Racial Justice for making this issue possible through their fund. Rewrite Reads is the literary magazine of Rewrite London, an award-winning platform for Black women and women of color writers around the world. And Rewrite London was founded in 2018. It's a community organization. We provide the tools, space, and confidence that Black women and women of color writers need to achieve their writing goals. So we have creative writing courses, workshops, and masterclasses. And we also write reviews for books of all genres, solely written by Black women and women of color. Simply put, Rewrite exists to rewrite the narrative, and you can find out more on rewritelondon.com. Now, since our literary magazine launched in 2019, we have published almost 30 pieces from writers living in different parts of the world, including Colombia, the Netherlands, Nigeria, South Africa, the UK, and US. And our second issue is themed changes, and our writers, 17 of them, all approach the subject in different and amazing ways. And today we are joined by 3 of them. I'll give a brief introduction of the 3 writers. Before I introduce the first one to the stage. I hope I can say stage in a virtual space. First is Ramya Jagathison, who wrote Crocodile Meat. Ramya was born to Sri Lankan Tamil parents and lives in London. Her short stories have been published in anthologies and magazines, including the UCL Publishers Prize for Student Writing 2015, the National Gallery's Degazine, and in Untitled Voices issue 1. Ramya is currently working on her first novel, Tea Child, which was longlisted for the Penguin Right Now 2020 program and was shortlisted for Agora Books' Lost the Plot Work in Progress Prize 2020. Ramya was also one of 10 writers chosen for Hachette's UK's Grow Your Story program and is a Curtis Brown Creative Alum. Will then be followed by Kea Adebani, who wrote Between the Lines. Kea is a lawyer, writer, researcher, Delhiite, Londoner, immigrant, native, daughter, mother, and on a good day, all of the above at once. And finally, we'll get poetry readings from Grace Adeyemi, who wrote Girlhood. Grace is a London-based poet of Nigerian heritage who shares stories about identity, loss, and love. Grace is working on a poetry pamphlet which explores growing up Black British. And Grace was longlisted for the Poetry London 2020 mentoring scheme and has work forthcoming in Sand Journal. And without further ado, and up first, I would like to introduce to the stage Ramya.
Hiya.
Hello, Ramya. Good evening. Thank you so much for joining us today, and congratulations on all your accolades and the shortlists. I know today we're going to be discussing your short story, Crocodile Meat, and I know you asked me to flag up some trigger warnings before we have the conversation. So for anyone who's joining who may have not read the story yet, it is a piece about war, trauma, death, grief, also conflict-based sexual violence. So we just thought it'd be really important to have that flagged early on. So now, Ramya, I'll be really curious if you can tell us a bit about your story, but also why Rewrite Reads. Let's start with that.
Okay, so Crocodile Meat is a magical realist story about a 9-year-old called Maya. Her elder brother was disappeared, sort of forcibly abducted by government forces at the end of the Sri Lankan Civil War. And the story follows that legacy on Maya and her mother as they live in the UK. So it's about things like intergenerational trauma and mental health, but I guess really, it's about a little girl and how she goes through life under the weight and shadow of her mother's grief. So that's kind of what the piece is about. And why Rewrite Reads? I don't remember how I found issue 1 of Rewrite Reads. Maybe an author I followed maybe retweeted it. But I do remember reading issue 1 and being absolutely blown away by the quality of the writing, by the poise and control of the writing and the variety of narratives. And I think I just wanted to be part of that club. I just wanted to see if my story could sit next to some really brilliant ones. So afterwards I sort of looked up Read Write London and saw your creative writing courses and like the high caliber of tutors you have. But originally I read issue 1 and sort of felt like, oh, it would be so great if my story could be in issue 2. And yeah.
Oh, that sounds amazing. And obviously we want to say thank you. But also, before we get you to read an excerpt, I'll also be interested in how this story speaks to the theme of changes.
Yeah, so it's an odd one. I think perhaps the story is more about what happens when there isn't change, if that makes sense. So it's about people who are sort of survivors of war, and it's about how they have no closure and they don't have answers. So it's basically asking, what happens to a family when there aren't changes, when there isn't closure, when there isn't accountability, when there isn't true reconciliation. I think the potential for change within a family, within sort of survivors, is so limited. So the story was really kind of maybe turning the theme upside down a little bit. It was kind of about, what happens when there is no change. So the story ends with this possibility of hope because it's going to be the new year, but then she's still sort of stuck in the cycle of trauma. So yeah, I think I turned the theme sort of upside down a little bit because it's really about what happens when there is no change.
And I really love that. And I'm going to enjoy unpacking a bit more these different themes and the way you approached it. But I thought it would be really nice for everyone watching to get a little bit of flavor of the story. I'll also stop my video so the focus will be all on you.
Sure, I'm just going to find it. I'm going to read a little bit from the beginning and then I'm going to jump forward to kind of the middle bit. So this is Crocodile Meat. Everyone says I was born like this because Amma was not in her right mind when she had me. Maybe everyone is right because I was there when I was born. I watched Amma as she held me, and as she looked at me, I looked at her looking at me. There was nothing on her face, like when you wipe a whiteboard clean. She looked at me with her whiteboard clean face, and I thought, yes, I understand. I understand that this is what it means to be alive. The lady in blue pajamas said, she's so beautiful. Amma said, I have a son. I do not know where he is. The nurse's face went all strange, which I now know is because she felt uncomfortable. I'm sorry to hear that, but you have a daughter now. Isn't she wonderful? I have a son. They took him away. The nurse looked at the man who I would call Appa when I could say it, and he just shook his head and his face went down low. I now know that was because he was sad. And then leaping forward a little bit. They took him, Amma says again and again. They took him and I don't know where. But when he comes home, what is he going to do? We are not there. His Amma is not there. When he comes home, there will be strangers in his house. How will he know we're here? Your father didn't want to think about it. He said it was more important to pack up and figure out how to get to London. He didn't care about how Theban would know where we are. That's because men always care. So what did I do? I wrote it on our walls. You remember our house? I was in her tummy when we left Sri Lanka, but I do remember our house. I saw it through Amma's eyes. I heard it through the skin of her belly. We lived in a small house with white walls. There was an open veranda where you could sit when it was really hot inside. The windows had wooden bars, but no glass. There was a fence made of large brown palmyra leaves that went all around our house. It was always hot. At night, you could hear the cicadas. During the day, when you said something that would come true, the house gecko would chirp. Yeah, that's just a little flavor of the story.
That was amazing. And there's one thing reading the story, but then listening to you read it's amazing. You already started touching upon what the story was about. And first, I love how you said you were turning turning around the theme of change. But even in the excerpts you've shared, it gives us a sense of this trauma, this grief that this story is about. So it'd be really great to find out more. And what was it like for you writing this story?
Yeah, so I do remember writing the story really clearly. It was 2020, it was lockdown, it was a really warm day, like today is in London. So it was a really warm day, and I had this idea for the story sort of floating around vaguely in my head for months. So at the beginning of 2020, the Sri Lankan Prime Minister declared that the sort of thousands of Tamil people, men, women, boys, girls, who've been sort of forcibly disappeared during the civil war and at the end of it, he basically said that they were all dead. But no one really provided details about how they died or kind of why they died, apart from the fact that it was a war and people were dying. And really, ever since the end of the war in 2009, there'd been sort of protests and vigils, families of missing people kind of asking for their loved ones to be released for answers, basically. And there were protests full of women, mothers who were out on the streets holding up photos of people who had gone missing, kind of crying. And all of this in quite a patriarchal society where women could have jobs, but really their duty was to their family, to their homes, to their children. So in that society where women are kind of out on the streets protesting, and kind of like politicizing their grief and weaponizing it and publicizing it and using it to kind of hold people to account, and trying to kind of remind people that people going missing, they're not just numbers or statistics, they're family, their brothers, their sisters, their sons, their daughters. So yeah, they needed answers, they wanted answers, but after the Prime Minister's declaration, it didn't feel like there were ever going to be answers. So basically, I couldn't shake this idea of being a father or a mother or a sister or a brother or a wife or whatever, and not knowing, and sort of knowing that your loved one was dead, but not knowing why, or how, or to have a body to mourn over. This idea that there would never be closure for you, you would never really know. And then all these other reports were coming in as well, kind of alleging that horrible things had been done to the body, that they'd been disposed of in crocodile-infested waters, really, really horrible, horrific things. And these were the things that stuck with me, and these were the kind of like political background to the story. Never having closure about the death of a loved one, never getting answers, and those people who get left behind. So I kind of imagined what it would be like to be a child, to have a mother who's so lost in grief, a mother who can't get closure. And I set the story in 2019 so that when the new year comes in at the end of the story, it feels like perhaps there's going to be like hope for change or something like that. But there won't be change, there won't be closure, because in 2020, it will bring news that the missing people are actually dead, but still not why or how, and that there is no change. So writing the story, it was tough. I think it was tough because it's kind of that question of what do you do when atrocities are being committed, and when there are horrible things going on and you feel like you can't do much. I mean, I could share things in social media, but I don't know, that always feels a bit disingenuous to me personally, because I don't really have a big platform. I don't really have lots of social media followers. So it doesn't feel like I'm doing anything. And in the end, what I did end up doing was just writing the story, sort of inhabiting these characters, inhabiting their lives. And I think it was a way to sit with that guilt, the guilt of being privileged, the guilt of not having to be immediately part of this, and kind of sitting with that helplessness, that frustration and that anger. I wrote the story on a really hot day, agonizing over making it as perfect as possible, because it felt like it wasn't just a story, it was something that I had to do, maybe. I'd always had that kind of first line about the daughter being present at her birth and seeing her mother. And I had like a vibe or like an atmosphere, a feeling. And then I kind of ran with it.
There's so many other things I would love to ask you. And it's really interesting when you talk about the missing persons and missing people. And I remember reading the story, and after a while, it getting very ominous, and me wondering what was going on. And I had to read it a second time because I was like, did I just read what I just read? And although, as you said, this is a political story, it is about a war and who was left behind. But underneath all of that is a relationship between a mother and a daughter. And did you worry that that aspect would be forgotten in the midst of writing a story about on politics?
I don't think so, because for me, that relationship, those two characters were actually the most important thing of the story, because they are the lens through which you see the politics. I think at times politics can feel kind of like nebulous and sort of that you're detached from it. And it's until you get a sense for the people who live through that politics, for whom the politics is an everyday reality, that you see what that politics really means. So for me, I think it was always going to be about this little girl, and it was always going to be about her mother. It's just that this is the background that it's set against. And for me, that relationship shows everything that you kind of need to know about the politics of Sri Lanka, almost the kind of the war and the effects of it. It all boils down to these two people trying to struggle through the rest of their lives together.
And that's really great because also in when you portray their relationship, it doesn't seem necessarily like a strong mother-daughter relationship. There seems to be a disconnect, and that's probably why I needed to when the second time I was like, that's why there's that disconnect between the two. And it seems like Maya is more of the trying to me, hold on to that relationship, and Amma is more focused on the past, who was left behind. So it'd be really great to hear more about that.
Yeah, I find mother-daughter relationships so interesting to like write about, but also read about. I think they're so interesting in like the real world. I think they're so interesting in how they're represented in books and films and theatre throughout the ages. Because I think mother-daughter relationships are so layered and nuanced and difficult, and rich and complicated and poignant, all these great words. And I think every mother-daughter relationship is sort of unique unto itself as well. And so for Maya and her mother, what I thought about was what it would be like to have a mother utterly lost to grief, and to have a relationship with a mother, and have a relationship that's so mediated through the lens of this missing brother. And yeah, what that relationship would be like. And I think a lot of daughters, a lot of girls in families, especially like diasporic families, they do so much emotional work. And I think that was something that I wanted to get through in the story as well. So Maya wants a bite for her birthday, but she knows the answer that will make her mother happy. So that's the one that she gives to her mother. So it's an interesting relationship, I think, to kind of write and to kind of think about, because they have the strongest bond in that Maya can see and feel her mother's experiences and thoughts the best and the most clear. But also she's sort of holding space for her mother and space for her grief. But at that same time, it is such a toxic and distant and dysfunctional relationship. So yeah, I think I wanted to write a relationship that was sort of glorious and toxic and really heartbreaking and really uplifting, and lots of kind of like contradictions all at once, or at least that's what I hope I tried to do.
Oh no, you definitely did. And I actually wanted to go next to writing and the style that you used, because I really enjoyed the way you used dialogue and how different aspects when Amma is or when Maya is channeling Amma, there's a different way you phrase it. When Amma is thinking back, there's a different way. When the community is gossiping about Maya, there's a different way. So it's really interesting. Why did you choose to write it in that way?
Yeah, I don't know. I think one of the hardest things about writing the story was the fact that so Amma and the other kind of like gossiping aunties in the community, they're all talking in Tamil. And then I'm sort of like translating it through into the English. So it's hard because it's trying to get the nuances and the kind of the meanings and the vocalizations of the Tamil to come through clearly in the English. So that was one thing that I think led to the style. I think it sounds how it sounds because it is trying to be a translated speech rather than a mother's talking in English. If she's talking in Tamil, it's being translated. So that led to it by itself to that particular style. And then I think also the reason why none of the kind of gossiping aunties or members of the community, they don't really have names or characters because they kind of didn't need names or characters. They were sort of reflective of all of the community and all of society who don't want to understand and don't want to empathize. So I didn't particularly feel like they needed names. They didn't need characters. And they were sort of internalized comments as well as external comments that Maya is actually hearing. So that led to kind of no sort of character markers or kind of speech markers. It was just them sort of talking to get that sense of a general kind of miasma of people saying stuff around this little girl. I think we all remember being quite young and hearing things and not fully understanding it, but being in the midst of all of that talk and trying to kind of navigate it. So I think that's what I was trying to do with the way in which that's sort of formatted and that's kind of stylized.
That's perfect. I totally forgot to say at the beginning that for anyone who's watching, please feel free to add comments or even questions. And I do have two here. One says a wonderful balance between the personal and political, seeing personal history as a testament to the public sphere, and there's an agreement, it's quietly powerful. And I think that is a great summary of your story. It is quietly powerful. It's a slow build to reveal what's going on with this family and with Amma and Maya. And unfortunately, our time is coming to an end, but I wanted to know if you could let us know what's next with you.
Yeah, just hopefully more writing. So I'm working on a longer novel with the Hachette Grow Your Story program. So I'm looking forward to kind of finishing that off. And that's going to be set in Sri Lanka. It's going to be more lighthearted than this particular piece, but it's about kind of identity and history and set in Sri Lanka as well. So yeah, fingers crossed, lots of writing and lots of good reading as well.
That's absolutely brilliant. And where can we find you? On Twitter, Instagram?
Yes, I'm on Twitter and I'm on Instagram. I don't remember any of my handles, but I do know that it's up on the Rewrite Issue 2 page. So anyone who's interested can find me on that.
That's absolutely perfect. And thank you so much for joining us today, Ramya. And
thank you
for
so much.
We're not done yet. We still have another speaker, Kaya, and a poetry reading, but we're going to take a few minutes break, and hopefully there'll be something showing in the background while we have the break and wait for Kaya. Thank you.
Happy to be sharing these poems with you this afternoon. I can't think of a group of women I would prefer to be reading to. And I'm also so happy to know that this is going to Ellen Kuzwayo and to Joyce Rota and to the other women of South Africa, because there are poems here that are particular and special for me and for them also. Echoes. You know, these poems that I'm about to read are all from my new book, The Marvelous Arithmetics of Distance. And this book, really, all of the poems in it deal with the different ways that we have of seeing things, depending on where we are standing, how distance alters our perception so radically. The title of the first is Echoes, and this is the poem that I was speaking to you about. There is a timbre of voice that comes from not being heard and knowing you are not being heard, which is noticed only by others not being heard for the same reason. The flavor of midnight fruit, tongue calling your body through dark light, piercing the allure of safety, ripping the glitter of silence around you. Dazzle me with color, and perhaps I won't notice till after you're gone. And your hot grain smell tattooed into each new poem, resonant beyond escape. I am listening in that fine space between desire and always, the grave stillness before choice. As my tongue unravels, in what pitch will the scream hang unsung, or shiver like lace on the borders of never recording which dreams heal, which dream can kill? Stabbing a man, burning his body for cover, being caught, making love to a woman I do not know.
Thank you so much. That was just a little break so we could stretch our legs and get some poetry. And up next, I would love to invite Kea. Hi, Kea.
Hi, Zara.
Thank you also for joining us today, and thank you for submitting to rewrite. So similar to Ramya, it'd be really great if you can tell us a bit about your story and why Rewrite Reads.
Yeah, sure. So my story, I think I need to start with a trigger warning similar to Ramya. So this story, I suppose at its simplest, it's a story about miscarriage. But I also think in a lot of ways, it's a story that tries to explore kind of the issues that hover around a miscarriage and particularly a person's experience of that miscarriage. So it tries to deal with pregnancy, with relationships or the lack thereof. It's a little bit of the immigrant experience. And I think it's broadly the more complex, sometimes unspoken, suppressed, emotional, physical, psychological, social aspects of pregnancy and miscarriages. And so therefore the trigger warning. I also just wanted to say, sort of in connection with this trigger warning, that once I had the story out, I had lovely sort of responses and reactions from a number of friends. And one of my friends said something really interesting where she said, I really like the story. I don't know who to send it to because this stuff is not spoken about. And it feels like such a minefield. I don't know who has had experiences with miscarriage that this would be triggering for, or experiences with pregnancy or infertility that this would cause problems for. And I think that was one of my, I suppose, concerns or worries, or definitely considerations when I wrote the story and wondered whether I should submit it for publication, because it really felt like one of those things that people don't really talk about. And should I be adding this kind of perspective, this kind of voice to something that's already so delicate and so difficult and so traumatic for so many people? I just thought it was still worthwhile adding that voice and perspective.
And I'd love to, because those are some of the things I would love to find out more from you. And it's actually one of the questions I have. But before then, why Rewrite Reads? Why did you want to submit this story to this platform?
So many reasons, actually. So to begin with, I took the Rewrite Tony beginner writers course with Christina just before the lockdown started. So we actually had our first few sessions before lockdown, and then our subsequent few sessions over Zoom. Rewrite, the course, the Tony course, really sort of taught me and made me think about the hard work of writing. And strangely enough, I always thought of myself as someone who writes, but then I realized I'd never actually written anything. And so I don't know why I think of myself as somebody who writes when I hadn't actually kind of done the work. I think I had this impression that good writing basically just flows from your pen if you're a good writer. And the Tony course really taught me to kind of do the work and think about the process of rewriting your story, etc. So it's Rewrite is really the place that got me to start thinking about putting words down on paper. And then Rewrite Reads in particular, because it's a safe, supportive space to try out. This is my first published piece, and it just felt like a platform where I felt safe sharing, particularly a story about miscarriage and experiences that women go through.
And before we go into more discussion about your story, it'd be great if you could read an excerpt for us so we can get a flavor of it.
Yeah. So I'm going to read a few paragraphs from the middle of my story, and I can talk about them a little bit after. Adil perches on a wooden footstool at the bottom of my bed, cradling his whiskey while I eye it enviously. You don't have to do this, Aditi. You can choose not to put yourself through this. You know I've got your back no matter what you decide. I get to choose, but that wouldn't necessitate the act of making a choice. I feel incapacitated. I could start off small, maybe choosing to get off the couch and change out of my pajamas. I cover myself with a blanket, exhausted at the thought. As the brain fog slowly starts to lift, I see my body start to change. A line, faint at first, fades slowly into view, like the line on the pregnancy test, until it's indisputable, splicing my stomach into two hemispheres. I rub my stomach with copious amounts of coconut oil every morning and evening. Yet there they are, white tendrils creeping up my waist, stretching towards my belly button with alarming coordination. My body feels inhabited, controlled by some kind of mad modernist sculptor who's wantonly disfiguring a form I'd tried relentlessly to perfect over so many years, patiently sculpting down its rounded edges and chiseling away at its unruly curves. Yet, as I recline on my couch, legs wide apart and my hand rubbing my gently rounding belly, I feel a strange sense of comfort in this alien posture that I had never before allowed myself to adopt. A smattering of images play out in my mind like a slideshow of memories from home. The vegetable vendor pausing outside our veranda as he sells Ma the week's vegetables, absent-mindedly picking the lint from his exposed belly button as he hands back the change. My grandfather's bare, hairy stomach bouncing off his thighs as he laughs, that huge, happy laugh of his, while lounging in his favorite chair on a hot Delhi summer day. In both images is a sense of the unashamed matter-of-factness about the contours of the human body that is generally reserved for men. I feel a sense of relief as I realize that different rules apply for pregnant women's bodies, just as different rules apply for men.
Wow. Again, there's one thing me reading it individually and listening to you as you tell the story, and there are new things I picked up. And one actually is linked to the first question I had for you, is around Aditi's roller coaster emotions and sometimes numbness towards what is happening. And when you read that bit about the body she had perfectly sculpted and it being, it's just interesting. I'd love to hear more about the way you conveyed her emotions, or lack of, maybe.
Yeah, I think lack of and numbness is absolutely on point. there is this sense of disengagement that I wanted to convey all the way through the piece, almost to a certain extent, an out-of-body experience where you're almost observing these things that are happening to your body that are out of control. And that bleeds through into emotions as well, that, you're almost not in control of your thoughts, your emotions in some way. There's this, earlier in the story, I talk about a brain fog that descends on you. There are sort of a mix of emotions and feelings that pregnancy and childbearing bring with it, but often they can feel quite disconnected, and I from your visceral experience, and I wanted a way to convey that, and I think numbness was what I wanted to convey, I guess, through the way I narrated the story. And also, I think there are a lot of words and emotions that are generally positive, that are connected with being pregnant or childbearing. And so usually people will use words like happy or excited or relieved or joyous or congratulate people, themes like that. And actually, I think getting pregnant and pregnancy as a whole, including the experience of miscarriages, is much more complex. It's a very complex set of emotions often. And so I wanted to convey sort of consternation and exhaustion and puzzlement and uncertainty and overwhelm and panic and, emotions that are not always spoken about when you're talking about the experience of pregnancy, and perhaps more closely associated with the experience of miscarriage, because it is the taking away of all of that joy that pregnancy is supposed to bring. But with that also, I kind of wanted to play with that narratively and think about, what are the other sort of complex emotions that come out of the experience of miscarriage.
And you conveyed those complex emotions great, because I was with Aditi as I was reading it. I was going through what she was going through. I was numb. I was sad. am I supposed to be feeling this way? And another emotion you captured, which also lends to the trigger warning you gave at the beginning, was Aditi's relief towards the end. And I remember reading that and thinking, how brave to write that and have that down, because this is a feeling maybe many who have been in that position may have felt, but didn't feel confident to voice it out. So could you tell us a bit about this relief that Aditi had?
Yeah. So I think for me, actually, the relief and so the way that the story ends with that sense of relief, though I hope it also comes across as slightly more complicated than pure relief. But I thought that relief was, for me, the crux of the story in a lot of ways. And it was a key question for me, as I said, sort of at the beginning of our session. Is it okay to write about this? Can I say this out loud? Particularly not because I feel that constraint about conveying the emotion of relief, but because I am aware of and really sensitive to the overwhelming grief that comes with miscarriage, and the fact that even that is not spoken about, and it's it's silenced and it's inadequately engaged with, etc. And so in that context in particular, it was a key question for me. Is it okay to feel relief? Is it okay to talk about the relief of miscarriage? And then also connected to that, the two big questions of who is allowed to feel that relief, and why should they feel relief? So for the who question, I deliberately wanted to create Aditi as a character who doesn't already have kids. So in a sense, I didn't want this to be the relief of, for example, not carrying through a second pregnancy to term or a third pregnancy to term. I wanted to ask the question, is it okay, even in the context of somebody who is, as is referenced there, childless or child-free? Relief is perhaps a more permissible emotion if you're already a mother and you've sort of fulfilled your purpose in some ways. But is it okay to have that if you don't have children already? Is it okay to feel relieved if you just want to live a child-free life? And also, is it okay to have that relief when you're 32, as opposed to say when you're 22 or 18 or 25 or whatever other age? So in terms of narrative, I specifically wanted to construct Aditi as a person who's contending with all of those different things. And then the why of the relief as well. I wanted to leave that fairly open-ended. So is she relieved because she has financial constraints? We don't know that much about her finances. Is she relieved because it would impede her career in some way, which is another narrative that comes up with women time and again, but we don't particularly know what she does, etc. Is it a question of family support, or is it kind of more trite issues like she doesn't want her body to change? And I'd say trite in air quotes for that. So those are kind of the things that I wanted to explore through referencing relief for her at the end of the story.
But yeah, in just listening to you, it is even bringing up a bit more and more the complexity of it and the complex emotions. And I remember at the end when when she Googled something on her phone, and also secretly Googled that, hoping nobody would see that. And I thought that captured again the secrecy that comes with these emotions. And I really wanted to know more because, for instance, this is something that has just come up while I'm listening to you. And you earlier on, I found it really interesting how easy, in quote, it was for Aditi to inform her mother. So I also then thought again, oh, that's an interesting relationship there. So, and also, even though the focus was on Aditi, I also like how you brought other people, other characters into the story to hear from them. So I know this is Aditi's story, but could you tell us a bit more about the other characters in the story?
Yeah, I think, again, that point that you made about, her relationship with her mother was quite important to me in the story as a whole, because one of the things I really didn't want to do is kind of have Aditi's experience of pregnancy and miscarriage kind of molded through other people's reactions and other people's demands and other people's opinions about what she should and shouldn't be doing. And that is also something I think, particularly in South Asian narratives about family and children, etc., that there is this constant hum of the family in the background, or the husband or the partner, or the mother-in-law, or there's all of this familial stuff that goes on generally in narratives. And I kind of wanted the story to step away from that, and for Aditi to have a supportive parent, a supportive partner, and to create that space through the other people in the story, for her to be able to have her emotions and her own reaction and her own process through the story. And so I didn't want to cloud that with kind of the hum of other people's expectations, I suppose. And so in a sense, I think the other characters in the story are reasonably uncomplicated, but I think possibly just the act of making them uncomplicated is unusual in the context of this story, or at least I wanted to make that point, that the story is about her and it's about her emotions. It's not about what everybody else thinks that she should do.
And that's really great to hear, to put it even in more context. And what I'm also really interested in, this is something I found in your story, and actually in a lot of stories in this issue, is the way in which conversation and feeling is conveyed, like the writing style, the form, which really stood out for me and I love. So it'd be great to learn a bit more from you about, the style you used and why.
Yeah, I'd love to say there was a huge amount of thought that went into the style, but honestly, it's kind of just how it came out. And I have to say that I was quite apprehensive about style from the get-go, because in my mind, I wanted the story to be more literary, to be more linguistic, to be more narratively complex, maybe to be slower. I worried about the fact that, the tone and the pace and the conversationality is quite contemporary. I didn't want that to come across as trite or, not literary in some way. I wrestled with that quite a lot because I wasn't happy with it, because I had this, I have this view of what good writing is and should be. And, narratively, I think with writers, there's always a struggle that you're not matching up to whoever you respect and admire. So there was that, but at the same time, it is just how it came out. I wanted it to have a fairly contemporary, modern, fast-paced sort of feel, both to the story and in terms of the speech that was used. I also wanted the speech to reflect a little bit like how I would sound in normal life. So, I wanted to mix Hindi and English a little bit in the story. I just wanted the speech patterns to feel natural and not stilted, basically. So that was important. And then just in terms of the movement of the narrative and the pace and things like that, one of the things I thought about and found interesting was that, so pregnant women, when I was pregnant, you obsessively measure things in weeks, and particularly this period over kind of 9 to 10 weeks to 13, 14 weeks, which is what the story is set in. So it's a period of about 4 weeks, is a particularly kind of fraught and crucial time in a pregnancy, because it's this period where, okay, the miscarriage risk is supposed to pass after 12 to 14 weeks. And a lot of women don't talk about their pregnancies until that risk has passed. It's also, a transition from the haze of the first trimester into relative ease of a second trimester. So in terms of narrative style, I kind of wanted to set the story over that period of time and deal with the emotions and issues that were coming up through that. And I guess the last point is that I just, in terms of writing and style, I like writing to make a point. I like writing to have an opinion. I don't want to bang anybody over the head with that opinion, but as far as I'm concerned, I want to say something besides just write well when I write a story. And so that was part of what I was trying to do as well.
Great. Well, you did it brilliantly. And unfortunately, we're coming to the end of our time with you, but it'd be really great to know what's next, or what can we expect next?
I have to say that this has given me a lot more confidence to try things. I am also part of a writers group that's come out of Rewrite, essentially. And so it's kind of just a supportive group of people. And Grace, who will come on after me, is part of that group as well. So we are figuring out what we can do as a group and thinking through things collectively as well.
That sounds amazing. And obviously, in our day and age, where can we find you? Can we find you on social media? And if you could share that with us.
So on my personal account, I generally post lots of pictures of my daughter, so I don't have it open to the public, but I do have a public account, which is under the Instagram handle Another Story Kids, and that's where I write about a blog about kids' books that focus on South Asian and Caribbean stories for children.
Well, that's absolutely amazing, and thank you so much, Kaya, for taking the time to speak with me and with us, and for submitting your story. And we were supposed to have a break, but after Kaya mentioned Grace, I was like, it would be really great if Grace could come up next. And Grace is going to do a poetry reading for us. But before then, I thought it'd be really great to kind of hear a bit more from Grace about her poem, what inspired her to write it, and why Rewrite Reads. Hello, Grace.
Hello, Zara. Thank you so much for this opportunity. I'm really glad, listening on to the conversations and hearing more about the layers, the stories. It's just been amazing. Rewrite has been a big part of my journey in terms of developing my craft. So I really wanted to share, this story. So the poem is called Girlhood, and I wrote it during the lockdown. So I was really looking back on my experience growing up in a Nigerian household, and really thinking a lot about routines. So what are the things growing up that brought joy? The things that were embedded into the day-to-day that seem like a given, but looking back, I can see added so much to my experience. So when I say routines, I'm looking into my hair, so getting my hair braided by an auntie, the foods as well that I grew up on, so certain foods that I associate with certain days in the week, as well as my entertainment, so my favorite author, as well as my favorite TV shows. I've also sort of hinted to some of the challenges growing up as well. So sort of having this idea of yourself or what you want to achieve, and then like society kind of saying to you, no, based on my measurement of you, this is what you should aim for. So I guess I was nostalgic. So looking back on my experience, but then also kind of thinking about what has stayed with me today. So like, what are the things that I still kind of carry on in the day-to-day that bring me joy. So whether that's my favorite hot drink or my favorite, TV show. So yeah, girlhood for me is just about celebrating growing up in the 90s in a Nigerian household. And I hope you enjoy it.
Thank you. I will go over to you. Thank you.
Girlhood. Charmed out of Saturday Owuro sleep by freshly fried akara and creamy pap. Come rain or shine, twirling around church on Sundays in native. Crowning weekdays with white rice and assorted meat stew. Finishing each night with a tall glass of warm choco milo. Starting each day with Dettol baths, smoothing my brown Palmer's cocoa, keeping 4 weeks single plats by Auntie Stella, collecting clusters of small glittery butterfly hair clips, licking rainbow sherbet powder off chubby palms, playing beehive bedlam at Nana's house, paying 40p for bus rides, blasting slow jams on MP3 players, guzzling KA sparkling Caribbean cola, orange soda with Keenan and Kel, conquering blue raspberry jawbreakers, slurping 2p red fizzy jelly snakes, sailing with Jacqueline Wilson, spinning predicted C's into A's, tuning into Sister Sister, raising $3.99 gooey alien babies.
Amazing. Grace, I have to say, when I read your poetry, when I read your poem, and I didn't grow up in the UK, but the line when you were with Keenan and Kel, honestly, an orange soda, in my head, I was like, I do. So that brought back a lot of memories. So I totally get the nostalgia from the piece. And I feel like even if someone didn't grow up in a Nigerian household or didn't grow up in the UK, there are just certain elements of your poem that is nostalgic. And I know we are coming to the end, but I just wondered if there's anything else you wanted to share about your poetry, and also about what next with you and where we can find you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Zara. I'm just going to continue reading, writing. I'm working on a pamphlet at the moment about my experience growing up Black British. So I will just continue to write, continue to share, and I'm just looking forward to continuing doing that.
Thank you so much. And if Kay and Ramya are still here, it'd be really great if all of us can be on the screen, just so we can, I can say a thank you again to everyone for being here today, for taking the time out, and also for submitting your story to Rewrite Reads. We really appreciate it, and I was blown away by every single story. And I've been saying to friends, I feel like a proud mama bear seeing all the stories up there. But thank you so much. And all that's left for me to say is thank you to everyone that's joined us on YouTube. We have another day lined up for tomorrow, where we're going to have 3 more contributors to our issue, speaking about their stories or their poems, even a photo essay, and why rewrite reads and what it means to them. So again, Kea, Ramya, and Grace, thank you so much. And I'm also going to say thank you to Christina. She's not going to like it, but I'm going to shout her out and say thank you so much, Christina.